All right, we'll continue our study tonight. The book of Genesis could be in chapter 41. If you're not already over there in your Bibles, I'd encourage you to turn over there with us. Of course, we don't take any time to read these. Hopefully you can either read them before you come. That's the goal. But I know sometimes life is busy. Maybe you can at least skim through it as we're going and kind of pick up on some of these answers. And thankfully, a lot of these stories in Genesis, these are things we've heard since we were children, so we probably know them backward and forward anyway, but it never hurts to go over them again. And of course, like I always say, every time doesn't matter what story it is in the Bible or what verse, every time I think, I've got everything that I can out of it, I read it and something pops up that I never even thought of. So hopefully it'll be helpful to all of us tonight. Let's start with question number one. This is a question that we discuss, from time to time. I think it's always good to remind ourselves of this, but the question is this: how does the world define a successful life?
Fame and fortune.
Fame and fortune. Okay, that's probably two of the things that would be at the top of a list if the world were to sit down and make a list of what they would consider, who they would consider to be successful in life. Any other attributes? Possessions. I think that would be toward the top of the list. And you think about it, the idea of being successful, depending on what nation and what society you grow up in, that definition of success is something that's taught to us, isn't it? It's not something that we're born with and, you just automatically come out of the womb and say, well, to be successful, I need to be rich and I need to be famous. But it's something that's often ingrained into us by the societies in which we live. And, you think about across the world, I'm sure there are some societies where what Americans would consider a successful life, they probably wouldn't agree with those same things. But, when we think about it from a worldly perspective, you're going to have to, I think success in a lot of people's eyes would be defined as getting a good education. You need to get a good education so you can get a well-paying job. You need to get a well-paying job so you can make a lot of money. You need to make a lot of money so you can buy a house and, a car and all those material possessions that you want, support your family and travel the world, and do and have the best of everything that this life has to offer. If you're able to do that, then a lot of people would look at that and say, well, you had a successful life, right? Think about Joseph here. Was Joseph's life successful? Yes. So the question becomes this: what was it that made his life successful?
What was the cause, or what was the thing that defined it?
Yeah, either one's fine.
Well, God is the cause, and I think the power that he had at the end is probably what people would say was made him successful.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Joseph, and obviously we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here, but we're going to talk about some of these things tonight as we go through it. He became a very wealthy man. Did he have a family? Yeah, he got a wife. He had 2 sons. And did he have a lot of possessions? Well, he was second in command of Egypt, so I'd say he had plenty at his disposal. And when we think about those things, that's what a lot of people would look at his life and say, well, that's made him successful. But even if Joseph had never gotten any wealth, even if he'd remained a slave or a prisoner in the land of Egypt, he would have had a successful life, wouldn't he? Now, not by the world standards, right? Because he wouldn't have met that criteria that everybody in the world today thinks that you need to accomplish in order to have a successful life. But true success has very little or nothing to do with the material things that we accomplish here in this life. And to me, that's always encouraging as a Christian. because you're under this immense pressure from the world, to meet all these standards and check all these boxes. But God tells us, we don't need wealth to be successful in His eyes. We don't need material possessions. We don't need prestige. We don't need money. Do we have to have a family to be successful in God's eyes? Not a requirement, is it? Not a requirement given by God to be successful. But, you can be a poor, uneducated person, an unknown person to many people, living in what we call today a third world nation, and you can be more successful than a lot of Americans, or I'd say most Americans, are going to be when it comes to standing before God. And that's something that, when you read stories like this, I think it's a good reminder. We need to remember how to measure success properly. And if we can ever get that, or maybe I always include you guys, maybe I should just say if I could ever get that aligned properly in my mind, do you think that would help me be more content in life? Yeah. Because I don't need all those things that the world says that I need in order to be successful. But Joseph, he's a good reminder of that, because there are times in his life where he has none of those things that he ends up with in the end, but he was still a successful individual in the sight of God. So let's talk about here chapter 41 a little bit, how Joseph gets to be second in command of Egypt. And of course that starts, or maybe I shouldn't say it starts, but it includes the dreams that Pharaoh has. So question number 2 here on your handout. Again, these are stories that we've studied, from the time of small children in Bible class. What did Pharaoh dream? Anybody remember Pharaoh's dream?
He had a dream about cows.
Okay. And elaborate just a little bit there.
That's fat cows, that's skinny cows.
Yeah. So he actually, God actually caused Pharaoh to have 2 different dreams, didn't he? And the first dream started out where Pharaoh is standing by the Nile River. Well, I say the Nile River, it just says the river. I mean, that's how the Nile was known in Egypt. You talk about the river, you were talking about the Nile River. And 7 fat cows, 7 healthy, well-fed cows come out of the Nile River and kind of stand on the bank there in the reeds. And then pretty soon, 7 pitiful, skinny cows, come out of the river, and they stand right beside these healthy, well-fed cows. And then suddenly these skinny cows eat the well-fed cows, and Pharaoh wakes up. I talked a little bit last week about crazy dreams. But if you had a dream like that, what would you be thinking? I don't know. That'd be a pretty weird dream to me, wouldn't it, you? And so maybe Pharaoh, at first, maybe he thought, well, that's kind of weird. Maybe there's something to it, maybe not. But then he has another dream. The Bible says he goes back to sleep. He has another dream. And in this dream, there's a stalk of grain or corn. Which one is it, Dennis? Corn or grain? Grain, okay. We're going to say a stalk of grain. There were 7 full ears on that stalk, very healthy. And then he also saw 6 or 7 very skinny ears on another stalk of grain. And the Bible even says that the east wind hit them, and they just, they were nasty looking anyway, but when the east wind hit them, they just shriveled up. And then suddenly those 7 skinny ears of grain eat the 7 healthy ears of grain. And Pharaoh wakes up. So, you have this questionable dream first, but then you have another dream kind of back to it that's almost the very same thing. And so those things contribute to Pharaoh in his state of mind, and of course some of the things that are going to happen here in chapter 41. The question number 3 on your handout is this, though. Why was Pharaoh so troubled about these dreams?
Because nobody could tell him what they meant.
Yeah. And he was a guy, and not just him, but we talked last week about the Egyptian mindset wasn't just the Egyptian mindset. It was a lot of these people and nations around here and leaders in those nations who believed that a dream was a divine message given to them. And they had to try to figure out the meaning of that dream and interpret it to get the message that these gods were sending them through these dreams. And so Pharaoh has these two dreams, and he immediately thinks this is a divine message. There's something that the gods that I worship are trying to inform me of, and I've got to figure out what the meaning of this is. Well, you sit down and you start thinking about it. I mean, what kind of meaning or interpretation would you come up with those dreams? Again, if it were me, I'd just say, that's some crazy dreams, I have no idea what those things were all about.
Why do you think they didn't, his people didn't just come up with something, because that's what they did anyway.
Yeah, you would think, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But, I mean, again, you kind of think about it, it'd be kind of hard to interpret or assign a meaning, I think, to a dream like that. Some dreams you have, and you could probably say, I might be able to understand, a little bit about this dream and what it means and why I had it. And then there's other dreams that you have, and, I just wake up and scratch my head and try to forget about as much as I can. But Pharaoh had no idea. He had no idea what the meaning or the interpretation of these dreams could be, but he knew this is a divine message or revelation that's been given to me. So I've got to get to the bottom of it. I've got to figure out what these gods are trying to tell me and figure out what my role and my job is in the outcome of these dreams. So God stirs Pharaoh up through these dreams, doesn't he? And again, these are things when you start looking through the Bible, God is working behind the scenes here, and he's working through natural means. I mean, is a dream a miraculous thing? Anybody ever have a dream before? Yeah, they're natural occurrences, aren't they? But God is using these natural events and natural occurrences to accomplish his purpose and his plan. And so one of the ways that he does that is through these dreams that Pharaoh had. It gets Pharaoh stirred up. It causes him to be uneasy, a little bit confused, concerned. And he felt that there was some significance in him, but he just couldn't find the meaning himself. So, question number 4 here. Steve already mentioned it just a little bit, but who did Pharaoh ask to interpret his dreams?
His wise men and magicians.
Yeah, the wise men of Egypt. And this is, again, one of those terms, magicians. I'm not crazy about that translation, but, we call the 3 wise men that come to visit Jesus, what do we call them? Anybody know? There's a term that we often use to refer to it. Yeah, magi, right? Well, what is that? You know where that comes from? Magician. Yeah, they weren't like guys out here doing magic tricks. But they were people who were very skilled, and they were people who had different abilities than everybody else. And a lot of times they use these. You remember Simon the sorcerer in Acts is it chapter 8? I think so. My memory's so bad anymore. Acts chapter 8, I think. But the Bible says that he put on this show that he was, this great man in the eyes of the people. And he was a sorcerer, right? So these guys used these skills and these talents to persuade people that what they said was true. And this was one of those guys. Pharaoh calls anybody and everybody who might have some higher ability than other people to try to interpret these dreams, figure out what the message is. But what was the result of that?
They didn't know.
They couldn't come up with anything, right? They couldn't come up with a proper meaning or interpretation. And maybe this is one of those things too. Steve kind of mentioned it there before. What do you think would happen if you came up with a wrong interpretation?
You probably just.
I doubt you're going to be a wise man in Egypt anymore, do you? And you would probably be lucky if you escape with your life. And so unless this was something that they could, assign vague and general things to, they probably didn't do a lot of interpreting. And even you know, when you get into Daniel, there's some questions when it comes to interpreting these dreams and their meanings. But I don't think they were just, you know, quick to jump the gun and say, well, this is the meaning and here's what's going to happen. Because if it didn't turn out that way, then you could end up in big trouble. So I don't think anybody was willing to go out on a limb here, you know, and try to assign a meaning or interpretation to it.
Was it in Babylon that he wanted to tell me the dream I had?
Yeah. Yeah, he put him on the hot seat, didn't he? He said, if you can tell me the dream, I know you know the meaning of it. So, but not every ruler was that demanding, were they? So Pharaoh tells them the dream, but the result, you know, they're all stumped. They just couldn't come up with a proper meaning or interpretation to assign to it. So all this is going on, and the chief cupbearer comes back into the picture. Remember, we talked about him a little bit last week. What does he tell Pharaoh here? Question number 5.
First, he tells him about his own experience of having this particular person interpret his dream. And then he goes ahead and convinces Pharaoh, this is the guy they need to get, and so they go after him.
Yeah. And this is again, you know, God working behind the scenes here. Did God cause the cupbearer to remember Joseph?
Sure.
Yeah. Through these events, right? Well, what happens when
How
you...
else did he forget it for all time?
What happens when the situation comes up, you have a dream and nobody knows the meaning of it? Oh yeah, I remember a guy like that. I remember a guy who can interpret dreams. And so exactly like Danny said there, the cupbearer goes to Pharaoh and he tells him about the encounter that not only he, but remember the chief baker also, that they had with Joseph while they were in prison. And he says, we both had dreams. And we didn't know the meaning and the interpretation of it, but this guy told us the meaning, and it happened just like he said it was going to happen. And so, again, the emphasis there, of course, is you should call for this guy. You know, you should call for this young Hebrew man because he has unusual understanding and insight when it comes to dreams. You know, you think about Joseph here, and again, this has been 2 years. Remember, Joseph helped the cupbearer and the baker while they were in prison with this dream. And the only thing he asked the cupbearer to do was remember him. He said, hey, when you get out of this place, bring my name up before Pharaoh and my cause and see if you can help me and get me out of here. But he forgot about him for the space of 2 years. We don't know why. We talked a little bit about that last week, but he did forget. And so think about it from this perspective here. Question number 6. How do you feel when people have forgotten about you after you help them out? You ever been in a situation like that before?
And I've been in the reverse.
Yeah. Okay. I would say probably all of us have. Wouldn't you? We've probably been guilty of that ourselves. But I mean, when you do something for somebody and, you know, you don't do it in order to get anything out of them, but one day, you know, something comes up and say, hey, can you help me out here? You know, you think about, well, you know, I helped you whenever you had a problem and I need something with you can help me with, and so will you do it? How do you feel if they don't do it? Make you feel good? Now, I think all of us would probably feel disrespected in some manner. We could say unappreciated, might even assign resentful. And can that make you not want to do anything good for anybody again?
Sure.
Yeah, can make us bitter, can make us harbor some feelings where, you know, we just say, well, nobody's going to appreciate it when I help them out, you know, or return the favor. I'm just not going to do anything good anymore. And of course, that's what Satan wants us to feel like. That's what he wants us to do. But I couldn't help but think of Galatians 6:10. You know, if we have the opportunity, we need to do good to all men. But he also says in that chapter, he says, don't grow weary in doing good. But you can get into a situation where You know, you get tired of doing good things because it's not appreciated. And Joseph could. I mean, he could have turned out to be a pretty bitter individual, but he didn't let those things get to him. So great lesson for us. Question 7 here, we really already covered that. Why did Pharaoh send for Joseph? Well, he'd been told that when Joseph heard a dream, he understood the interpretation of it. So Pharaoh calls Joseph before him. And what exactly does Pharaoh say to Joseph? Question 8 here.
It tells him that he's heard that he can interpret dreams.
Yeah.
Then the gutsy part is he goes, no, I can't. This guy.
Yeah. And you think about Joseph and Pharaoh's conversation, you know, Pharaoh is obviously, I mean, he wants some help. First of all, to turn to a slave, to a prisoner, and you're the ruler of the country for help. I mean, that kind of indicates to you how desperate Pharaoh was and how badly he wanted to know the meaning and the interpretation of this dream. But, you know, he just tells him, he said, listen, I had this dream and I've called all the wise men, called all the magicians of Egypt, and they just can't give me an interpretation or a meaning to it. And so I've heard that you're good with dreams. I've heard that you have the ability to interpret and assign a meaning to them. And of course, like Matt pointed out, Joseph said, no, not me. You know, I don't have any ability. I don't have any talent, but God does tell me dreams, and he does tell me the meaning and the interpretation of those dreams. And so Pharaoh had to at least think, well, maybe I've got a chance. You know, maybe I've got a hope, because this guy is a guy, and again, this goes back to the magicians or the wise men. You know, they've got a relationship with divine beings. They've got something that nobody else has. And so that was kind of the way that he was looking at Joseph here. So obviously, question number 9 here, Joseph gives God the credit for interpreting these dreams. Why is it important? Why is it important to give God credit for, you know, the deeds that he accomplishes and works through us to accomplish? Is it important?
Well, with Pharaoh, it gave Pharaoh more credibility to the fact that he had dreamed that dream. And so it validated whatever results it was came from God.
Yeah.
And he had to have an appreciation for God at that point because he had no other choices.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting, you know, you read the language here. Joseph doesn't identify the God that he's receiving these interpretations from. It's kind of like a general term for a God. You know, I mentioned before, when you find the word Lord, the English word Lord in capitals throughout the Old Testament, that's the Hebrew word identifying God, Jehovah. And so he says, you know, yeah, a divine being gives me the interpretation of these dreams. And so did Pharaoh think, well, that's the same divine being I worship? No. Would he have been willing to accept an explanation from another god of another nation? I don't know. But it is kind of interesting. But Joseph does, of course, give the divine being credit. And, you know, that is important in anything that we do in life. I think one of the reasons it's so important that we always give God the credit. And this is one of those things, you know, I always tell you guys, I like sports. I watch a lot of sports. And I don't know, it used to kind of rub me the wrong way when, you know, somebody accomplishes something in sports and they come out and they say, well, I want to thank God. And I always thought, yeah, how do you want to thank him? You know, go out and get drunk or miss services on the first day of the week? You know, how are you going to thank God? But there is a sense in which if you acknowledge what you're able to accomplish, the ability to do that didn't come from you, it does keep you humble, doesn't it? Or it can at least help. It can go a long ways. And that's what we always have to understand in anything that we do. You know, the only reason we're able to do anything is because God has given us the power and the ability. And without him, I mean, what are we without God? We're not even existing without him, right? We're here because God made us. And, you know, even if a person could be here without God, always think about this: where you go live? You go live in this world? Well, guess who made it? How you go breathe? What do you go breathe? Oxygen? Well, guess where you got it? I mean, we are totally dependent upon God, aren't we? You know, I think about Paul, what he said of Mars Hill there in Acts chapter 17. In him we live and we move. We wouldn't be alive. We wouldn't be able to move without God. Where'd we get our bodies? We made those ourselves, right? Where'd you get your spirit, your life? Came from God. And without him, we're nothing. And, you know, God is the one who gives us the power and the ability. And without him, we are nothing. We can do nothing. And if we can keep that in the forefront of our minds, again, that goes a long ways in keeping us humble. So question number 10 here. What did Joseph tell Pharaoh about his dreams?
He basically told him about they was going to have 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine.
Yeah. So Joseph tells him, first of all, he says, you know, the dreams are one and the same. They're not two separate dreams with two separate meanings or interpretations. They're basically the same dream with the same meaning and interpretation. And of course, he told him, you know what, God is revealing to you. God is revealing to you, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, what he is about to do. And so he's telling you that there's going to be 7 years of full and plenty that are followed by 7 years of emptiness and lacking and famine. And one of the things that we learn here that Pharaoh doesn't immediately state, or it's not stated about his dream there in the first part of this chapter, is what happened after those, you know, scrawny, pitiful cows ate the big fat cows? What did they look like after? Very same, right? So what was that all about? Well, what Joseph explains to him is, you know, that those 7 lacking years are going to be so bad that it's going to wipe out all those 7 years of plenty. It's going to be like they never even were there in the first place after those 7 years of famine and lacking get done. And then, of course, he points out the fact that God gave you this dream twice emphasizes 2 things: the certainty of it. It's going to happen. Nothing's going to can be said or done to undo it. And then the second thing was the quickness, the rapidness with which this thing was going to begin to occur. And so he tells Pharaoh about his dream, you know, tells him about the numbers, tells him about the meaning of all these things. And then Joseph doesn't stop there, though, does he? Question number 11 here. What does Joseph tell Pharaoh he should do in light of having these dreams?
Get started quickly.
Yeah. And, you know, this is one of those things where, you know, I have to wonder a little bit, is this Joseph? You know, Joseph was a pretty sharp guy, wasn't he? I mean, we learned that pretty quickly in his life. He's a leader. He's got solutions. He deals with problems. He's a great solver. Is this a solution that was given to him by God? You know, or is this Joseph just being Joseph? And so basically what he tells Pharaoh is you cannot leave this up to individuals. Okay, you cannot count on the individuals to take care of this. You got to do something on a national level. And here's what you need to do. Why couldn't you count on individuals? What happens when you get 7 years of prosperity? You lay it all back and you say, we need to keep this safe, you know, and not touch it and make sure it's there for a rainy day, right? What do we do as individuals?
Use it up.
That's right. We say, oh, prosperity, right? Use it while you got it. And so Joseph said, you can't count on the individual to take care of this on their own. You need to do something on a national scale. And here's what you need to do. You need to put a guy who's smart in charge of it. A guy who's going to do right. You know, a guy who's got a good solution. And here's really the way you need to set this up and organize it. He said you basically need to establish, commissioners, different commissioners throughout the land of Egypt in different places and build storehouses there where grain can be laid aside for these 7 years of famine. And of course, this is kind of an interesting thing too. I don't know, do you think that Pharaoh taxed a fifth of the harvest or that he bought it off the people?
I think it was a tax.
Could be. Could be. It's also possible he could have bought it too. And, if he bought it and laid it aside, makes it the plan a little bit more detailed to me. But at any rate, Joseph says, here's what you got to do. You got to take a fifth of the harvest. Okay, you got to store it up, and you got to keep it there, and don't take any out. Don't try to get to it. Don't let anybody access it until this famine comes upon the land, and then we can open up the storehouses, and we'll be fine. We'll have enough food to deal with this.
Now, didn't he distribute that food in exchange for the land at the end?
Yeah.
So I don't feel like he's a giving kind of guy.
Well, he was a businessman, wasn't he? I mean,
He
he
basically just took it all over the country, didn't he?
yeah. And think about this too. What did that do for Egypt as a world power?
Oh, yeah. It consolidated.
I mean, if they weren't prepared for this, and they were already a very powerful nation, but if they weren't prepared for this, it could have wiped them out, couldn't it? But they're kind of getting a leg up on everybody here. And Joseph says, you're going to have food. Nobody else is. People are going to be coming to you. And the nation of Egypt becomes very wealthy and very powerful because of this.
Well, it said it was a worldwide famine.
Yeah.
And so everybody, at the end of the chapter, it said what he did, he sold it. He didn't give it to the people.
No.
He sold it to them. And,
Yeah, we'll probably talk about that a little bit more, but I mean, it started out with you pay money for it. What happened when people ran out of money?
He took
Sucker
his
stuff.
Start selling your land, right? Start selling your houses. When you run out of land and houses, what do?
And that's the Egyptians.
Yeah, you sell yourself into slavery.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it benefited Egypt immensely. No doubt about it. But Joseph, basically tells him, here's what you need to do to deal with the problem. So, we're about out of time, so we're going to have to fast forward just a little bit. His solution for the problem impressed Pharaoh so much that it convinced Pharaoh that Joseph was the right man for the job. And basically, Joseph says, you need to assign a guy who knows what he's doing. Here's what you need to do. Pharaoh says, you're that guy? If you know what the future is going to happen in the future and you know how to prepare for it, there's no one better. No one better to put in charge than you. And so the Bible says that Joseph stored up grain in huge quantities. And it starts out, he said it was like the sand on the seashore. Can you imagine that? But Joseph started keeping a record, and the Bible says it got to the point where you couldn't even keep a record of it anymore. That's how much food that Joseph had laid up for these 7 years of famine. We also read about him. Of course, he gets married in the process. He has 2 sons. He assigns the names to these sons are important. Manasseh is the first one. What does that mean? It means to forget. Yeah. And Joseph said, God has caused me to forget all the bad things that have happened in my life. Joseph was feeling pretty good right now, And then he had another son and named him Ephraim, double prosperity or twice blessed. God blessed him. He was blessed, when he was 17 years old in his father's house. God blessed him again. So he'd been twice blessed by God. The rest of the story, Egypt was the only nation that had food. When people started lacking, they turned to Pharaoh, sent them to Joseph. He says, whatever Joseph tells you to do it. And that's the story of how he rose to power. You think about his climb to the top. Was Joseph's climb to the top like this? It was like this, wasn't it? You think about the Christian life. Christian life's a lot like that too. You get to the top, but it's not a straight climb, is it? there's a lot of ups and downs in life. All right, out of time. Anybody got any thoughts, comments, questions before we end?